Jax's revenge domain. Are you seriously suggesting we bet our Q4 manufacturing efficiency on some legacy spreadsheet with AI lipstick? The words hit like a sledgehammer to the chest. Gerald Whitman, our 34-year-old VP of Innovation, had just reduced 12 months of my life's work to a punchline. He delivered it with that practiced smirk he'd perfected in business school, the one that said he'd rather explain quantum physics to a golden retriever than listen to another word from me. I'm Harold Brennan. I'm 46 years old, and I've spent the last 23 years making manufacturing processes run better for companies that actually matter. Boeing, Ford, General Motors. Places where a 2% efficiency improvement translates to millions in savings, not theoretical PowerPoint victories. The conference room at our mid-sized automotive parts manufacturer had gone dead silent. Not the good kind of silence where people are processing something impressive, the kind where you can hear the HVAC system cycling and someone's coffee cup hitting the table too hard. 12 people staring at their laptops, phones, anything except the train wreck happening at the head of the table. I had just finished presenting my predictive maintenance system. 30 minutes of real data, actual benchmarks from similar facilities, and a working prototype that could predict equipment failures with 87% accuracy. The kind of system that could save our company $2.1 million annually in emergency repairs and production downtime. Built on manufacturing principles that work in the real world, not just in consultant presentations. Gerald leaned back in his ergonomic chair, fingers steepled like he was about to deliver wisdom from on high. Thanks for the effort, Hal, but we need digital native solutions. This feels like legacy thinking dressed up in modern clothes. Legacy thinking. 23 years of hands-on experience had suddenly become legacy thinking. The committee responded like middle managers who'd caught the scent of blood. Throats cleared in sequence. Papers shuffled with unnecessary volume. Diane Foster from HR studied her smartphone screen like it contained the cure for cancer. Peter Martinez, our junior analyst who still had spine and potential, shot me the briefest look of sympathy before fixing his gaze on the conference table like it owed him money. The humiliation didn't arrive all at once. It crept in through my shirt collar, up through the soles of my work boots, settling in my stomach like bad cafeteria food. By the time Gerald had moved on to discussing our partnership with some Silicon Valley startup that charged $47,000 annually for what amounted to Excel with better graphics, I was already calculating how many evenings I'd need to prove him wrong. Any other questions about the quarterly innovation pipeline? Gerald asked, scanning the room like a teacher checking for sleeping students. I kept my mouth shut, gathered my materials, and stood up. Not the presentation slides, those were burned into my memory after 50 practice runs. I left the printed deck on the table like evidence at a crime scene. Thanks for your time, I said to nobody in particular, then walked out. In the elevator, I allowed myself exactly one moment of pure rage. Clenched fists, deep breath, a few words I wouldn't repeat in church. Then I smiled for the first time in weeks. You want to dismiss my experience as outdated? Fine. I'll show you what outdated thinking can accomplish. That night, I sat in my home office with a legal pad full of system diagrams I'd been sketching during boring vendor meetings. Process flows. I'd been refining for months while listening to consultants explain basic manufacturing concepts like they'd discovered fire. Interface mock-ups drawn with free design software my nephew had recommended during last Christmas dinner. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon, opened my personal laptop, and created a new folder. Not legacy AI. The next 4 hours disappeared. I mapped out core prediction algorithms based on failure patterns I'd documented across 3 different companies, integrated vibration analysis techniques I'd learned troubleshooting pump systems at Ford, built a neural network architecture that could actually understand how equipment degrades in real manufacturing environments. Nothing fancy, nothing that required venture capital or a team of Stanford graduates, just solid engineering built on actual experience. Meanwhile, back at the corporate theater, our operations team was struggling with Gerald's $3.4 million predictive maintenance platform from McKinsey Digital Solutions. The system required 3 weeks of training just to generate basic reports, had already failed to predict 2 major equipment failures, and crashed every time someone tried to upload more than 6 months of historical data. The first breakdown had cost us $187,000 in emergency repairs and lost production time. The second one shut down our main assembly line for 18 hours, while we waited for replacement parts that the AI should have flagged weeks earlier. I started adopting a new workplace persona. Burnout victim. Easy to fake when corporate life already sucks your soul through endless meetings about optimizing meeting efficiency. I began declining extra assignments, claiming bandwidth constraints during planning sessions. At 46, they expected me to start coasting anyway. A week after my presentation disaster, Peter cornered me by the coffee machine that perpetually brewed something resembling motor oil. "Hey, that maintenance system you showed us actually made sense," he said, glancing around like he was sharing state secrets. "I pulled some numbers based on your failure prediction models during lunch." "The math works." I raised an eyebrow. He shrugged and lowered his voice. "If you ever wanted someone to stress test algorithms or run data models off the books, I've got time." Just like that, the seed found fertile ground. Gerald thought he'd killed my idea in that conference room. Instead, he'd just given it motivation and a co-conspirator. There's something pure about writing code at 1 a.m. in your basement office while the suburban world sleeps, blissfully unaware they've been sold overpriced solutions by people who've never actually fixed anything. That's how my rebellion began. No startup incubator, no angel investors with more money than sense. Just me, a 6-year-old Dell laptop that wheezed louder than my neighbor's leaf blower, and a brain that refused to accept that experience had become a liability. Every night after escaping my corporate performance art, I'd microwave leftover dinner, open a beer I could actually afford, and dive into Python scripts and machine learning frameworks. Beautiful, methodical problem solving. I pulled maintenance records from government manufacturing databases, integrated supplier quality data, built prediction models using open source tools I'd learned from YouTube videos. Everything stayed completely isolated from work. Not one line of code touched my company laptop. I set up a separate internet connection, registered a business email account, got a P.O. box using my middle initial. I was more paranoid than a defense contractor handling classified documents because I knew our IT department combined boredom with authority, a dangerous combination. One security breach accusation, and they'd eliminate my pension, which at 46 represented the difference between comfortable retirement and working until I died at my desk. I tracked every expense in a composition notebook. $31 monthly for cloud hosting, $18.99 for a wireless keyboard, because the old one had started typing random letters, $52 for Thai food delivery, because proper nutrition is optional, but Pad CEW isn't. My savings account took hits, but my sanity started recovering. Every algorithm brought the system closer to something that could actually help people solve real problems instead of generating reports that nobody read. The predictive maintenance engine I was building didn't just regurgitate textbook formulas. It learned from actual equipment behavior, adapted to environmental factors, understood that machines break differently depending on shift schedules, operator experience, and a dozen variables that no consultant had ever bothered to study. Meanwhile, Gerald's digital transformation initiative was hemorrhaging money faster than a startup with unlimited venture capital and no business model. The training process had become a full-time job for 3 people. Our maintenance supervisor was pulling 60-hour weeks trying to manually track equipment that the AI was supposed to be monitoring automatically. During one particularly painful status update, the McKinsey consultant proudly demonstrated their revolutionary pattern recognition capability. What they showed us was essentially a linear regression model that any engineering student could have built in a weekend, dressed up with enough buzzwords to justify their billing rate. Gerald nodded like he was witnessing the splitting of the atom. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need. I wanted to stand up and explain that innovation means actually improving something, not just making it more expensive. Instead, I smiled politely and took notes on my legal pad while secretly sketching improvements to my vibration analysis algorithms. The cracks in Gerald's digital paradise were becoming impossible to ignore. Production managers were quietly complaining that the real-time dashboard updated every 4 hours, making it about as useful as yesterday's weather forecast. The system had missed predicting bearing failures in 2 different machines, costing us another $240,000 in emergency repairs. And there I sat, enduring these slow-motion disasters while my prototype hummed along quietly on my home network, successfully predicting maintenance needs with the kind of accuracy that Gerald's expensive consultants promised but never delivered. I stopped volunteering for high-visibility projects. When colleagues asked how I was handling the workload, I'd sigh dramatically and say, Just trying to keep all the plates spinning, you know? They'd nod sympathetically, their eyes glazed from their own death-by-PowerPoint existence. The rebellion wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, systematic, and it was developing teeth. The first time someone used my system without knowing who I was, I nearly spilled coffee all over my keyboard. I'd finally uploaded what software developers call a minimum viable product to a basic website hosted on the cheapest server I could find. Called it Industrial Insight Analytics, with a logo I'd cobbled together using free design software that made it look like a factory schematic had been interpreted by artificial intelligence. No founder biography, no team photos, no venture capital press releases. Just a simple tagline: smarter maintenance predictions. No consultants required. Then I closed the laptop, poured myself another bourbon, and tried not to think about it, except thinking about nothing else was impossible. That same night, a precision machining shop in Wisconsin uploaded 14 months of equipment data through my basic web interface. They wanted help predicting when their CNC machines would need recalibration. My system chewed through their data for about 2 hours, much more realistic than my initial overly optimistic estimates, and suggested a maintenance schedule that could reduce unexpected downtime by 18%. The email response came at 6:47 a.m. This is incredible. Better than the enterprise system we're paying $32,000 annually for. Who are you people? I read that message about 20 times, then started pacing around my kitchen like a caged animal. Because nobody prepares you for the moment when your practical idea stops being theoretical and becomes something people actually need. It doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like you're holding a live grenade with a loose pin. More businesses started trickling in over the following weeks. A small automotive supplier in Tennessee, an independent repair facility in Oregon that specialized in industrial equipment, even a guy named Jim Patterson who managed maintenance for a regional trucking company and was tired of replacing brake systems on emergency schedules. My system analyzed his fleet data and identified patterns tied to route types, load weights, and driver behavior. It suggested preventive maintenance schedules based on actual usage instead of generic time intervals. Jim wrote back, "I don't know who you are, but you just saved my budget and probably my job." Each success felt like validation and panic in equal measure. One minute I'd be grinning at my computer screen in my basement office. The next, I'd be checking my business email like it might explode, imagining teams of corporate lawyers preparing cease and desist orders, but nobody from my day job came knocking, and the user base kept growing. People started requesting features, integration with popular maintenance management platforms, customizable alert thresholds for different types of equipment, mobile dashboard access for technicians working on factory floors. I spent most nights until 2 a.m. implementing changes, fixing bugs, writing documentation that made me sound like a legitimate technology company instead of one middle-aged engineer with a grudge and too much caffeine. A small community formed around the platform. Users shared optimization tips in the support forum I'd built using plugins that probably hadn't been updated since smartphones had physical keyboards. They traded strategies for improving prediction accuracy, asked thoughtful questions about algorithm parameters, requested case studies for specific industries. I watched it all happen through my moderator dashboard, fascinated by how people could collaborate to solve real problems when they weren't trapped in corporate meeting cycles and budget approval processes. My imposter syndrome kept trying to surface, whispering that I was just a factory engineer pretending to be a software entrepreneur. But the data was impossible to argue with. My system was helping actual businesses avoid real problems. More importantly, it was working better than the expensive alternatives they'd been sold by consulting firms with impressive credentials and zero practical experience. Meanwhile, back in the corporate theater that still paid my salary, Gerald's digital transformation was becoming a case study in expensive failure. The $3.4 million McKinsey solution had just completely missed predicting a catastrophic pump failure in our main production line. The breakdown shut down manufacturing for 22 hours, cost us $410,000 in emergency repairs and missed deliveries, and required flying in specialists from Germany to rebuild components that should have been replaced weeks earlier. You know what would have caught it? My basement-built algorithm that monitored vibration patterns and operating temperatures. I'd specifically designed it to detect the bearing deterioration signatures that lead to centrifugal pump failures, based on identical breakdowns I'd seen at Ford and GM. But Gerald was too busy managing crisis communications to notice the irony. The office was in full damage control mode. Slack channels exploded with corporate speak about emergency root cause analysis and vendor accountability frameworks. They brought in additional consultants to figure out why their original consultant system wasn't functioning as promised. One of them actually stood up during an all-hands meeting and asked, "Should we consider evaluating alternative predictive modeling approaches?" I almost burst out laughing. Instead, I sat in the back row drinking burnt coffee and watching them drown in their own expensive mistakes. They hadn't wanted to bet money on legacy thinking. Turns out paying premium prices for innovation theater costs significantly more than building something that actually works. The transformation in my professional demeanor was becoming impossible to hide. Where I'd once enthusiastically led cross-functional improvement initiatives with detailed project plans and color-coded spreadsheets, I now participated with the minimum engagement necessary to avoid performance reviews. I'd show up to meetings 5 minutes late, sit quietly with my camera off during video calls, type makes sense in chat while secretly processing customer feedback for industrial insight on my phone. My corporate job had become background noise in my life, ambient sound I tolerated while building something that genuinely mattered. Whenever anyone questioned my reduced enthusiasm, I deployed the most bulletproof excuse in American corporate culture. I think I'm just dealing with some burnout. The workload has been pretty intense. Instant understanding, sympathetic nodding, no follow-up questions. The beauty of corporate burnout culture is that nobody wants to fix it. They just want to acknowledge it exists, make supportive sounds, and move on quickly before they catch it themselves. I'd become a ghost with health insurance. Direct deposit still arrived every 2 weeks. My badge still opened the security doors. And while the office struggled to understand why their expensive AI kept missing equipment failures by weeks, I spent my weekends building roadmaps for something 10 times more reliable. Every small victory in my secret professional life felt like adding fuel to a fire that had been smoldering for months. A feature request implemented within days instead of going through 6-month approval processes. A grateful message from a small manufacturer in Ohio who called my system the first AI tool built by someone who actually understands how factories work. A manufacturing engineer in Pennsylvania sent a detailed case study showing how my predictions had helped them avoid a $95,000 emergency repair by identifying bearing wear patterns 3 weeks before failure. He concluded his email with, "Whoever built this understands manufacturing reality, not just theoretical models." That's when I realized I wasn't just building software anymore. I was building proof that experience and practical knowledge could create something genuinely valuable, something that worked in the real world instead of just impressing people in conference rooms. The corporate job was still a paycheck and a benefits package, but my actual work, that was out there in the real world, functioning, evolving, helping people solve problems that mattered. The moment everything changed started with a LinkedIn notification that made my blood run cold. I was sitting in another pointless quarterly planning meeting, pretending to take notes while actually reviewing user feedback on my phone, when the notification popped up. Someone had shared a post about industrial insight, analytics. The name in the notification looked familiar. Jim Patterson, Senior Operations Manager at Apex Manufacturing Solutions. Apex, our biggest competitor and, if I'm being honest, a company I genuinely respected. They hired people who actually understood manufacturing instead of just talking about digital transformation. But Jim Patterson wasn't just any operations manager. I'd worked with him 8 years ago when I was consulting for Boeing on a supply chain optimization project. Smart guy, the kind of engineer who could spot BS from across a factory floor. His LinkedIn post was short but devastating. Finally found a predictive maintenance solution built by someone who actually understands manufacturing. No idea who's behind industrial insight analytics, but they get it. Real-world results, not consultant fairy tales. My hands went numb. I set my phone down and stared at the conference table like it might provide answers. Had he recognized my work, my approach to equipment? Analysis? 23 years of experience creates patterns that are hard to disguise, even when you're trying to stay anonymous. I spent the rest of that meeting in paranoid overdrive, mentally reviewing every algorithm I'd published, every case study I'd shared. Had I used terminology that could be traced back to my previous projects? Was my methodology too distinctive? But instead of panic, something else started building in my chest. Electric anticipation. If Jim had recognized the quality of my work, it meant I wasn't operating in an echo chamber. It meant my system had real substance, genuine credibility. It meant I was no longer just playing defense against Gerald's dismissiveness. 3 days later, the email arrived that would change everything. Subject line: Strategic Partnership Inquiry. Confidential sender: Patricia Wells, Senior Vice President of Technology, Apex Manufacturing Solutions. My coffee went cold while I read it twice, then 3 times, then called my startup lawyer at 11:47 p.m., even though I knew he'd charge me emergency consultation rates. Patricia had been quietly tracking industrial insight through industry forums for 6 weeks. Her team had tested my system against several manufacturing scenarios and compared it to 3 different enterprise solutions, including the same McKinsey platform that Gerald had inflicted on our company. Her message was direct and professional. Your predictive maintenance algorithms are exceptional. They outperform systems costing 10 times more. We'd like to discuss acquisition. Are you available for a confidential conversation? The phone call happened 2 days later. Patricia was sharp, direct, and refreshingly honest about what Apex wanted. They'd been looking for predictive maintenance technology that actually worked in real manufacturing environments, not just laboratory demonstrations. They'd tested expensive solutions from Oracle, IBM, and 3 different consulting firms, all impressive in presentations, all disappointing in practice. Then someone in their Wisconsin facility had started using my system unofficially and achieved results that made their existing enterprise software look like an expensive joke. We want the technology, Patricia said. More than that, we want whoever built it to lead our new predictive analytics division. This isn't just acquisition, it's strategic hiring. The due diligence process took 5 weeks and felt like the most thorough job interview of my career, except instead of begging for a position, I was being courted by engineers who understood what I'd built and why it mattered. They tested my algorithms against historical failure data from 12 different manufacturing facilities, compared my prediction accuracy to their current systems, interviewed my early users about implementation experience, analyzed my code architecture for scalability and security. Every test made them more interested. My system consistently outperformed their existing solutions while requiring 70% less computing resources and 0 consulting support for basic implementation. The final offer arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was sitting in yet another meeting about optimizing our optimization initiatives. Patricia's email was succinct: $42 million for complete technology acquisition plus 5-year employment contract as Chief Technology Advisor, with substantial equity participation in expanded analytics business unit. I excused myself from the meeting, walked to my car, and sat in the parking lot reading the offer document for 45 minutes. Then I called my lawyer, my accountant, and my daughter at college to tell her she wouldn't need student loans for her final semester. The contract negotiations took another week. We cleaned up some intellectual property clauses, clarified the equity participation structure, and added provisions to bring 2 of my best freelance developers onto the Apex team. I wanted the people who'd helped build this to benefit from its success. I signed the papers on a Thursday afternoon in my lawyer's conference room. The announcement would go public the following Monday morning. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without checking my business email every 2 hours. Monday morning, the press release hit at 9:15 a.m. Apex Manufacturing Solutions acquires Industrial Insight Analytics for $42 million, names Harold Brennan Chief Technology Advisor. By 9:23 a.m., I had 52 voicemails, 73 Slack messages, and a calendar invitation marked emergency. Executive committee discussion scheduled for 11 a.m. I was technically still an employee for 3 more days. The emergency meeting would be interesting. Gerald was already in the boardroom when I arrived, looking like he'd aged 5 years since Friday. Same guy who'd called my work legacy thinking was now staring at the acquisition announcement like it might spontaneously combust and take his career with it. Our CEO, Charles Morrison, didn't bother with pleasantries. He waved the printed press release like evidence in a courtroom. "Gerald, you rejected this?" Gerald opened his mouth, but only a sound like air escaping from a punctured tire came out. The room was absolutely silent except for the HVAC system and someone's nervous pen clicking. "Harold," the CEO continued, turning to face me, "you have 3 days left on our payroll. How would you prefer to spend them?" I stood there in the same work clothes I'd worn to my original presentation, calm and composed. I'm happy to help transition any ongoing projects or answer questions about manufacturing optimization approaches that might be useful going forward. Then I walked out, not to my cubicle to pack personal items, but straight to the parking lot, to my truck, to the rest of my professional life. The corporate job that had defined my identity for over 2 decades was ending. But my actual career, the one I'd built in secret while they dismissed my experience, was just beginning. 3 months later, I would return to a similar boardroom. But next time, I wouldn't be an employee hoping for approval. 4 months later, I walked back into that same boardroom. But this time, I wasn't carrying a presentation deck hoping for approval. I was there as Chief Technology Advisor for Apex Manufacturing Solutions, with a signed licensing agreement in my briefcase and enough equity to retire comfortably whenever I chose. The room looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe that was the difference between being owned by a company and being valued by one. Or maybe it was just perspective that comes with genuine professional security. Gerald was still there somehow, probably too expensive to fire outright, too incompetent to promote. He'd been moved to a lateral position with an impressive title that controlled absolutely nothing important. Senior Director of Innovation Strategy, the kind of job they create when they can't figure out what else to do with someone. He spent most of the meeting studying his hands while I explained how the system he'd dismissed as legacy thinking could save his former company $3.8 million annually in maintenance costs alone. The same algorithms he'd rejected were now licensed technology that Apex was implementing across 23 manufacturing facilities in North America. Our CEO, Charles Morrison, had requested the meeting personally, not to negotiate. The licensing terms were already finalized. He wanted to understand how they'd missed such an obvious opportunity. More specifically, he wanted to know what other good ideas they might have rejected along the way. "The system we're licensing from you," he said, glancing at the technical specifications. "This is essentially what you presented to us 18 months ago, isn't it?" "Improved version," I replied. "Same core principles, but refined based on real-world feedback from 340 manufacturing facilities across 12 industries. The original prototype you saw was maybe 60% of what we're implementing now." Gerald shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Someone coughed. Diane from HR was taking notes like she was documenting evidence for a lawsuit. "What would it have cost us to develop this internally?" Morrison asked. "About $180,000 in development costs, assuming 18 months with one senior engineer and part-time developer support." I kept my voice matter-of-fact, professional, plus whatever internal testing and refinement you wanted to add. The silence that followed was the kind you hear at accident scenes. Everyone calculating the same math. They'd spent $3.4 million on a system that didn't work instead of $180,000 on one that could have saved them millions. And the licensing fee we're paying Apex for this technology? $850,000 annually, with implementation support included. More silence. Gerald was now studying the conference table like it contained the secrets of the universe. Morrison closed the folder with a dry snap. "Gerald, do you have anything to add to this discussion?" Gerald cleared his throat, started to speak, then just shook his head. What could he say? That he'd been wrong wasn't news to anyone in the room. That it had cost the company several million dollars was painfully obvious. That his judgment on technology evaluation might need some recalibration was the subtext hanging over everything like smoke from a dumpster fire. "Harold," Morrison said, "I appreciate your professionalism about this situation. I'm sure it would be easy to be less gracious." I nodded. No point in being bitter. Business decisions get made with the information available at the time. Sometimes the information isn't complete. It was true, mostly. I wasn't bitter anymore. Success is an excellent antidote to resentment. But I also wasn't going to pretend that Gerald's dismissiveness had been based on incomplete information. He'd had all the data he needed. He'd just chosen to trust credentials over competence, buzzwords over benchmarks. After the formal meeting ended, Morrison walked me to the elevator. "Can I ask you something off the record?" "Sure. How many other ideas like this have we missed? How many people like you have we discouraged?" It was a good question, an important question. "I honestly don't know," I said. "But if you want to find out, you might start by asking your experienced people what problems they'd solve if they had the authority and resources. Then actually listen to the answers." The elevator arrived. I shook Morrison's hand and stepped inside. "Good luck with the implementation," I said as the doors closed. 6 weeks later, I was in my new office at Apex reviewing expansion plans for our predictive analytics division. 32 employees now, including Peter Martinez, who'd taken a 35% pay increase to leave his old job and join our team. Real engineers, smart people who understood that the best innovation often comes from experience, not just enthusiasm. My phone buzzed with a text from my daughter. "Dad, my engineering professor mentioned industrial insight in class today as an example of practical AI applications. I told him my father built it. He wants to know if you'd guest lecture next semester." I smiled and typed back, "Tell him I'd be honored." That afternoon, I got an email from Jim Patterson, the operations manager whose LinkedIn post had started the acquisition conversation. His company was implementing our system across their entire manufacturing network and seeing remarkable results. Equipment downtime was down 31%. Maintenance costs had dropped by $2.4 million annually, and their production efficiency had improved to levels they'd never achieved before. He concluded his message with, "Whoever you learned from, they taught you well. This is exactly what manufacturing needs, technology built by people who understand how things actually work." I forwarded the email to my old mentor from Boeing, the guy who'd taught me that the best engineering solutions are usually the simplest, ones that solve real problems for real people. He'd retired 5 years earlier but still kept track of interesting developments in manufacturing technology. His reply came an hour later. "Proud of you, Harold. You proved that experience and wisdom never go out of style. They just need the right opportunity to shine." Gerald never came up in conversation again. His fate was corporate entropy, gradually marginalized until he became irrelevant. Last I heard, he'd moved to a different company where he could start fresh, hopefully with lessons learned about the difference between innovation and renovation. But me? I was never invisible again. My story became something people talked about in industry conferences, not as a revenge tale, but as proof that good ideas can come from anywhere, that experience has value, and that sometimes the person who gets dismissed in one meeting becomes the expert everyone wants to hire in the next. The next time someone tells you that your experience is outdated, your knowledge is legacy thinking, or your practical approach isn't innovative enough, remember this: there's a huge difference between being old-fashioned and being proven right. And sometimes the sweetest success is simply being undeniably, measurably, profitably correct while maintaining your integrity throughout the journey. The best revenge isn't getting even. It's building something so good that dismissing it becomes impossible, and doing it with enough class that people respect not just what you built, but how you built it. Success tastes better when you've earned it the right way. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building something so valuable that they eventually have to pay you for what they once rejected, while you maintain the dignity they never showed you. In a world obsessed with youth and innovation, the greatest victory is proving that experience, patience, and quiet competence will always outlast arrogance, buzzwords, and expensive mistakes.